Some American towns have been abandoned for decades, yet locals still warn visitors never to go alone. Most people think ghost towns are just empty buildings and history. If you're the kind of person who wants to understand what economic collapse actually looks like and why these warnings exist, subscribe. Because what looks like forgotten places is actually a preview of what happens when entire economies disappear overnight. And the warnings aren't about ghosts, they're about toxic soil, unstable mines, and the very real cost of cleanup that nobody wanted to fund. That's what we're breaking down today. These aren't just tourist attractions with dusty saloons. These are places where mining booms turned to dust, where entire industries vanished, where populations dropped from thousands to zero in months. The warnings from locals aren't supernatural. They're about infrastructure collapse, environmental hazards, and what gets left behind when economic systems fail completely. Today we're breaking down 25 American ghost towns, from mining disasters to industry collapse, and by the end you'll see exactly what gets left behind when the money runs out and everyone leaves. Some of these places are genuinely dangerous. Others are museums. All of them tell the same story about what happens when towns bet everything on one thing. Between the 1800s and 1980s, hundreds of American towns boomed on single industries: mining, timber, oil, manufacturing. When those industries collapsed, so did everything else: tax revenue, services, maintenance, safety systems. Some are open to curious visitors, others remain genuinely dangerous, and a few are still fighting to survive. This channel exists to follow what happens after economic collapse, and what these ghost towns tell us about economic dependency that still exists today in places that don't know they're vulnerable yet. Number 25. Centralia, Pennsylvania. A coal fire has been burning underground since 1962. Smoke rises through cracks in empty streets. Warning signs mark condemned zones. Only 5 residents remain out of a peak population of nearly 3,000 in 1890. Coal mining sustained the town until an underground fire forced evacuation. The government bought out properties and condemned the town. The cost of extinguishing the fire was estimated at over $600 million, deemed too expensive for a dying town. So they let it burn. Imagine paying taxes on a house the government says doesn't legally exist anymore. When fixing a problem costs more than the town's entire economic value, governments make calculated decisions to walk away. Number 24. Bodie, California. Preserved in arrested decay, nothing restored, nothing removed. 110 buildings stand exactly as residents left them in the 1880s. Tables still set, goods still on store shelves. 10,000 people lived here during the gold rush. Now it's a state park that generates over $2 million in annual tourism revenue, more than the gold rush ever provided in stable income. The restriction is serious. It's illegal to remove anything. The Bodie curse legend claims tourists who steal artifacts experience terrible luck. Every year people mail stolen items back with apology letters describing their misfortunes. The ghost town now generates steadier income than the extraction economy ever did. Number 23. Picher, Oklahoma. Lead and zinc made it rich, then lead and zinc poisoned everyone. The entire town was evacuated in 2009. Chat piles, which are mountains of mining waste, tower over abandoned homes. Peak population was 14,000 in the 1920s. Current population is 6 people who refused to leave. Lead and zinc mining created $20 billion in wealth. It's now an EPA Superfund site with contaminated groundwater and a lead poisoning epidemic. Children tested with blood lead levels 3 times the danger threshold. The government buyout cost $60 million. The physical danger includes subsidence and sinkholes from abandoned mines. The wealth extracted exceeded the cost of cleanup, so the town paid the price instead. Number 22. Cahaba, Alabama. Alabama's first state capital, now underwater 6 months a year. Crumbling columns stand among flooded streets. Confederate prison ruins rot in swampland. Malaria-carrying mosquitoes thrive. 3,000 people lived here in the 1820s when it was the capital. Flooding forced relocation of the government. The cotton economy collapsed with the Civil War. Now it's an archaeological park only accessible seasonally. The Capitol building foundation literally sits in a swamp. Geography always wins against economic ambition. No matter how much political power or money a place has, if the land doesn't cooperate, the place fails. Could a modern capital face the same fate with rising sea levels? Number 21. Rhyolite, Nevada. Built in 1904, abandoned by 1916. A 12-year lifespan for an entire town. Concrete ruins of a 3-story bank building still stand. The bottle house, built from thousands of glass bottles, remains structurally sound. Open mine shafts dot the area. Peak population hit 5,000 in 1907. The gold mining boom lasted only 8 years. Infrastructure was built for 30,000 people who never came. Warnings include unstable structures, open mines, and extreme heat reaching 120 degrees Fahrenheit in summer. They installed electric lights before having reliable water. Building for permanent growth based on temporary resources guarantees waste. How many modern boomtowns are repeating this exact pattern today? Number 20. Gilman, Colorado. A mountain mining town perched at 9,000 feet, completely fenced off since 1984. 40 buildings cling to a cliff face above the Eagle River. Zinc, copper, lead, and silver mining supported 300 residents. The mine closed when contamination made it economically unfeasible to continue. The entire town is now a Superfund site with acid mine drainage poisoning the water. Trespassing is prosecuted. The elevation and isolation meant everything had to be hauled in. When the mine closed, there was no backup plan. It's one of the most visually dramatic ghost towns in America, and also one of the most toxic. The warning here isn't about danger from collapse. It's about invisible contamination that can harm you without you knowing. Number 19. Cairo, Illinois. Not fully abandoned, but losing the fight. Peak population was 15,000 in 1920. Current population is barely 2,000. Located at the confluence of the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, it was once a critical transportation hub. Racial violence, white flight, and economic disinvestment created a downward spiral. 80% of the town is vacant lots or condemned structures. The levee system protects the town from floods, but can't protect it from economic forces. This one matters because it's happening in real time. You can watch a town die slowly on census data. The question isn't if it becomes a full ghost town, it's when. Number 18. Terlingua, Texas. A quicksilver mining town in the Chihuahuan Desert near Big Bend National Park. Peak population was 2,000 in the early 1900s. The Mercury mine closed in the 1940s. Current population fluctuates around 60 people, mostly artists and eccentrics. Ruins of the old mining operations scatter across the desert. Temperatures exceed 110 degrees in summer. The isolation is extreme. Nearest city is hours away. What makes this different is the comeback attempt. New residents are betting on tourism and remote work to revive it. It's an experiment in whether ghost towns can be resurrected through economic reinvention. So far, it's working for a small group willing to tolerate harsh conditions. Number 17. Tynemouth Creek, Alaska. Not well known, which is exactly why it's on this list. An abandoned salmon cannery village on Kodiak Island, accessible only by boat or float plane. The cannery operated from the early 1900s through the 1970s. When fishing regulations changed and automation reduced labor needs, the village emptied. Buildings are collapsing into the creek. Brown bears roam freely through structures. The warning here is wildlife, not structural danger. This represents hundreds of similar remote Alaska ghost towns where nature is aggressively reclaiming space. The economic lesson is that resource extraction in extreme locations only works when margins are high enough to justify the logistics cost. Number 16. Jerome, Arizona. The town that almost died, but didn't. Peak population was 15,000 in the 1920s during the copper mining boom. By 1953, the population dropped to 50 people. Now it's rebounded to around 450 residents surviving on tourism and art galleries. It's perched on Cleopatra Hill with buildings literally sliding down the mountain due to old mining subsidence. The jail famously slid 150 feet downhill and is now a tourist attraction. Jerome proves that ghost towns can come back, but not through their original industry. The copper is gone forever. The comeback is based entirely on selling the story of the collapse to tourists. Number 15. Drawbridge, California. The only ghost town in San Francisco Bay, built entirely on stilts over a salt marsh. It was a hunting resort town with 90 buildings in the 1920s. Accessible only by rail, it served wealthy San Francisco residents. When duck hunting regulations tightened and the rail service ended, everyone left. Now it's within the Don Edwards San Francisco Bay National Wildlife Refuge. All structures are collapsing into the marsh. Access is prohibited to protect wildlife and because of structural danger. This one shows how regulatory changes, not economic collapse, can kill a town just as effectively. The economy was fine, the laws changed, the town died. Number 14. Kennecott, Oregon. Once the wool capital of the world, shipping millions of pounds annually. Peak population around 600 in the early 1900s. The railroad bypassed it in 1911, and the town emptied within years. Current population is around 36 people. The historic hotel and school still stand. What's interesting is the ongoing legal battle over who owns the town. Various developers have tried and failed to revive it. This illustrates that even with infrastructure intact and historical value, location matters more than ambition. If the transportation networks don't support it, revival is nearly impossible regardless of investment. Number 13. Bombay Beach, California. On the shores of the dying Salton Sea, this was a resort town in the 1950s and 60s when the sea was a tourist destination. The sea is now one of California's worst environmental disasters, increasingly salty and toxic. Dead fish line the shores. The smell is overwhelming. About 300 people still live here, mostly retirees and artists. Trailers and abandoned buildings sink into toxic sand. It's technically not abandoned, but it's in active collapse. The economic lesson is that environmental degradation destroys property values faster than any market crash. People stay because they can't afford to leave. That's a different kind of trap than most ghost towns. Number 12. Vulture City, Arizona. Built around the most productive gold mine in Arizona history, peak population around 5,000. The mine closed in 1942, and everyone left. The town is privately owned now and operates as a tourist attraction. But here's what's unusual. Visitors report the highest number of genuinely dangerous incidents at this location. Rattlesnakes in buildings, unstable floors collapsing, extreme heat causing medical emergencies. The private owners have limited liability and maintenance budgets. This represents a growing trend of ghost towns becoming private tourist ventures with minimal safety oversight. The economic incentive is tours, not safety. Visitors assume preservation equals safe, which is often wrong. If you're still watching, you're seeing the pattern. These places didn't fail randomly. They were built on single economic sources, and when that source vanished, everything collapsed. The next towns show what happens when entire regions make the same mistake at once. If you want to understand where economic vulnerability exists today, hit that subscribe button and like this video, because recognizing these patterns before they repeat is exactly why this channel exists. Number 11. Kennecott, Alaska. Copper made millionaires, then everyone left in 24 hours. A 14-story mill clings to a mountain. The hospital has its operating room intact. Homes contain personal possessions still on beds. Peak population reached 600 in the 1920s. It was the richest copper deposit in the world. The Kennecott Copper Corporation extracted over $200 million worth of copper in early 1900s currency. When ore quality declined, the company closed operations. The entire town evacuated immediately. It's only accessible by foot or bush plane. When profits drop below operational costs, corporations abandon infrastructure instantly. This is what a company town looks like when the company owns everything and then leaves overnight. Number 10. Thurmond, West Virginia. Once processed more freight than New York City, now has 5 residents. The historic depot still stands. Abandoned coal tipples rust beside empty rail yards. Over 500 people lived here in the 1930s. 95,000 rail cars moved through annually carrying coal. The coal decline devastated the economy starting in the 1950s. The National Park Service now owns most buildings. Warnings include structural instability and strict trespassing laws. Infrastructure built for extraction economies becomes decorative when the economy shifts. Imagine processing more commerce than Manhattan, then becoming a footnote that tourists photograph from train windows. How many modern single-industry towns face this same trajectory? Number 9, Glen Rio, Texas, New Mexico. Built entirely on Route 66 traffic, died when Interstate 40 bypassed it. The town sits directly on the state line with split jurisdiction. Motels, diners, gas stations frozen in 1970s Decay. Peak population was around 50 in the 1950s. It was a pure service economy dependent on highway traffic. Interstate 40 opened 2 miles away in 1975. The entire economy collapsed within 3 years. Federal highway decisions prioritized efficiency over preservation of small-town economies. Owners watched traffic disappear overnight when the new route opened. What modern infrastructure changes will create the next Glen Rio? When electric vehicles dominate and charging happens at home, what happens to every gas station and highway diner in America? Number 8. Anaconda, Montana. Not fully abandoned, but catastrophically declined. Peak population was 12,000 in 1980. Current population is around 9,000. The Anaconda copper smelter was one of the largest in the world. Atlantic Richfield Company closed it in 1980, eliminating hundreds of high-paying jobs instantly. The smelter site is a Superfund location with severe arsenic contamination. The stack, at 585 feet, is one of the tallest freestanding brick structures in the world and slowly crumbling. The town still functions but lost its economic engine. This is what managed decline looks like. Services cut, schools closed, hospitals reduced. The population that remains is older and poorer than before. It's a slow-motion ghost town. Number 7, Kinzua, Pennsylvania. Flooded on purpose. Not abandoned due to economic collapse, but erased by government decision. The entire town was demolished and submerged in 1965 to create the Kinzua Dam. Residents were given 18 months to relocate. The dam was built for flood control and hydroelectric power, overriding the community's right to exist. On low water years, foundations of buildings re-emerge from the reservoir like tombstones. This is different from the others because the economy was functional. The federal government decided the town's value was less than the dam's value. How many modern communities could face similar calculations with climate adaptation infrastructure? Number 6, Silver Peak, Nevada. Still technically inhabited with around 107 residents, but functionally a ghost town. It was a silver mining boomtown in the 1860s. Mining declined, then surged, then declined again, multiple times. What's happening now is fascinating. Lithium extraction is bringing new industry. The town is caught between ghost status and potential revival. This matters because it shows the unpredictability of resource economics. Towns die when their resource is obsolete. Sometimes that resource becomes valuable again decades later. The people who stayed are either vindicated or watching newcomers profit from what they endured. Economic revivals rarely benefit those who survived the collapse. Number 5, Chloride, Arizona. A silver mining town that refuses to die. Peak population was around 2,000 in the 1900s. Current population hovers around 370 residents. The mines closed decades ago. The town survives on a combination of retirees, artists, and minimal tourism. There's no gas station, limited water, dirt roads. What's compelling here is the stubbornness. Residents know it's economically irrational to stay. They stay anyway. Some ghost towns empty because people leave. Some become ghost towns because newcomers never arrive. Chloride is frozen in limbo, not alive enough to grow, not dead enough to abandon. This is what ideological resistance to economic reality looks like. Number 4, Boron, California. Not abandoned, but single industry dependent. Population around 2,600. The entire town exists because of the U.S. borax mine, one of the largest open-pit mines in California. Borax is used in detergents, fertilizers, and industrial applications. The mine employs most of the workforce. If global demand shifts or the mine depletes, boron becomes an instant ghost town. What makes this scary is how invisible the risk is. The town functions normally right now. Schools operate, stores are open, but the entire structure is one corporate decision away from collapse. There are hundreds of towns like this across America. They look stable until the day they're not. Number 3, Times Beach, Missouri. evacuated entirely due to dioxin contamination. Population was 2,000 in 1982. A waste hauler sprayed dioxin-laced oil on dirt roads for dust control in the 1970s. By 1982, the EPA discovered contamination levels thousands of times above safe limits. The federal government bought out every property and evacuated the town. It was demolished and is now Route 66 State Park. This is the only ghost town on this list where not a single structure remains. It was erased. The economic lesson is that hidden environmental damage can render property worthless instantly. Times Beach homeowners lost everything because a contractor cut costs by using contaminated waste oil. No economic collapse, no industry failure, just poison in the ground and a town erased from existence. Number 2, Pripyat, Ukraine. Technically international, but the economic lessons are universal. Built in 1970 for Chernobyl nuclear power plant workers, population reached 49,000 by 1986. The Chernobyl disaster evacuated everyone within 2 days. It remains one of the most radioactive places on Earth. Buildings stand intact, frozen in Soviet-era design. It's the most famous modern ghost town. The economic model was pure company town, everyone employed directly or indirectly by the plant. One catastrophic failure eliminated the entire economic base instantly. What's haunting is how modern it is. This isn't an old mining town. This is recent enough that children of evacuees are still alive. It proves that modern infrastructure and technology don't protect against sudden total collapse. Number 1, Detroit, Michigan. Not fully abandoned, but 139 square miles of vacant lots exist within an operating city. Peak population was 1.85 million in 1950. Current population is around 630,000, a 65% decline. Auto manufacturing collapse devastated the tax base. 70,000 structures are abandoned. 40% of streetlights were removed to cut costs. The city filed bankruptcy in 2013 with $18 to $20 billion in debt. Demolition of dangerous structures costs over $850 million. Detroit is the clearest example of what single industry dependency looks like in a modern American city. While other ghost towns lost hundreds, Detroit lost over 1 million people while remaining technically operational. Neighborhoods vote on whether to keep streetlights or use money for police. Fire departments use abandoned neighborhoods for training burns because there's no money for proper demolition. Detroit isn't on this list because it's dead. It's here because it shows what a slow-motion ghost town looks like when it's too big to fully abandon. Is Detroit recovering or previewing the future? Whether they collapsed in a decade or a century, whether from mining, manufacturing, or infrastructure changes, every one of these towns believed their economy was permanent. They all face the same pressure. Economic systems built on single sources always end the same way. The only question is timing. The warnings locals give aren't about superstition. They're about toxic soil, unstable mines, crumbling structures, and financial cleanup burdens nobody wanted to fund. If this helped you see the economic patterns behind the abandonment, subscribe. Every week we break down the places and systems most people won't think about until they're living through the collapse. Understanding why these towns failed is how you recognize which modern places are vulnerable before the headlines arrive. Because the next ghost towns are being built right now. They just don't know it yet. Subscribe so you can see them coming.